Okay, so we're reviewing now page 9 from the homework that you were working on last week. And when I just told a few people that they had some corrections to make, I was referring to this as page 7. For some reason, I couldn't see the page number and I thought it was page 7. It's apparently page 9. So if I told you you have the corrections to make on page 7, I meant page 9. Sorry. And for the most part, the issues that I found were that some of you we're not putting the correct form of être. So here, the subject is plural, mes parents. So when you say mes parents, you need to say mes parents sont avocats. Okay? You should have, for number 2, you would have needed to change sont to ça because fille is feminine. And then you would also change pharmacien to pharmacienne to use the feminine form of that occupation. The other thing to check for is make sure you did not use an article. You should not have un or une. They do not use articles with professions. And here, number 8 would be leur tante est actrice, to use the feminine form of actrice. Okay, page 14 was another one that some students will need to correct and resubmit. So I was really happy with the number of students that had this, just really nailed it the first time, so that was great. Remember that the goal of this page is to practice the skill of using a verb plus an infinitive. So you need those two, you need basically 2 verbs in a sentence, and the second one will be in the infinitive form. So the sentence has one verb, like you have a Coke, but the one in parentheses is going to be added, and now you'll have 2 verbs. So the student had to decide the conjugation of the verb in parentheses, and then you have to put the other verb in the infinitive now. So instead of saying you have a Coke, it's you want to have a Coke. Okay, so an incorrect answer would have been just you want a Coke. That sentence makes sense, and if you wrote tu veux un coca, you wrote a good sentence. The thing is that the instructions are to use a verb plus an infinitive, so it needs to say you want to have a Coke or take a Coke, however you're translating prendre there. So you should have verb plus infinitive for each sentence, okay? And if you did not get that correct, I am asking students to redo this exercise because I want to make sure everyone knows how to use a verb plus infinitive. I want to make sure everyone understands that if you have 2 verbs working together in a sentence, that the first one is it makes agreement with the subject, and the second one is in the infinitive form. Now, one thing that we didn't really practice with this was what to do if the sentence is negative. So just to give you examples of those, if you were making this sentence negative, that would be tu ne veux pas prendre un coca. Okay, the negation, the ne pas, the 2 parts of it would go around the helping verb or the verb that is conjugated to the subject. Okay, the infinitive would be left out of that negation sandwich. Okay, so affirmative, je vais prendre du café. Negative, je ne vais pas prendre du café. All right. Okay, so if students could please correct anything that was a mistake on page 14 and resubmit that for a grade. Okay, so to go along with the verb plus infinitive grammar that we're working with, I want to remind you about the verb aller, which means to go. I want everyone to have their aller conjugations memorized. And I want you to remember that when you use aller with an infinitive, that's called the future proche. It means you're going to do something in the near future. So for example, je vais parler au prof means I'm going to talk to the teacher. Or ils vont acheter une nouvelle voiture. They're gonna buy a new car. Or elle va vendre sa maison. She is going to sell her house. So it's the same concept of a verb plus infinitive. Just keep in mind that it means you're going to do something in the near future because of what the verb means that you're using. You're using the verb that means to go. Again, if you were going to make that negative, then the ne pas would go around the conjugated verb, the first verb. There was a mistake in this document that was emailed to everyone. You're supposed to be putting in your grammar notebooks any verbs that you didn't already have. And the correct conjugation for vouloir for il or elle plural is veulent. Veulent. I was copying and pasting there and forgot to change the last one over. So it's supposed to be veulent. So an OI vowel combination is wa. So these three would be pronounced doit. Then we have devant, devait, and doivent, because of course the ENT is silent and the OI says wa, so doivent. Here's the verb recevoir, means to receive. We have je reçois, tu reçois, il reçoit, nous recevons, vous recevez, ils, elles reçoivent. Again with the OI saying wa, reçoit, reçoivent, ENT is silent. There is a cedilla on the C when it's before the O because a C in front of an O would normally make the K sound, but with the cedilla, it makes the S, so reçoit. Here, a cedilla is not needed because it's in front of an E. Recevons, recevez. Here's the verb boire. I'd like that on page 27 of your grammar notebook. Bois for the first three. Buvons, buvez, boivent. And now we come to the verb venir, which is verb number 28 in your grammar notebook. And this verb means to come. Like you could say, she's coming to the party. He's coming to school with us today, that kind of thing. So the infinitive is venir, and the conjugation is je viens, tu viens, il vient. So these three sound the same. Here's a T instead of an S here. Viens, vient, vient. Nous venons, vous venez, ils viennent. Viennent. The ENT is silent. Viennent. Okay, in your notes packet at the bottom of page 7, you see a small table that talks about verbs conjugated like venir. So I just showed you the present tense conjugation of the verb venir, and it is an irregular verb. It's not an IR verb, because if it were, it would have the endings like finir or choisir, where you would say things like nous finissons, vous choisissez, those long ISS endings that go on the plural form. But instead, you can easily see that venir is a very irregular verb. The stem of it changes from in the boot, the je, tu, il, and il plural forms versus the nous and vous forms. The stem is different. And so it's an irregular verb. However, there are these 6 verbs that follow a very, very similar pattern. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the meanings of these verbs. We have devenir, which is to become. Obtenir, which is, you'd say obtain, but I think the best translation is to say get. Prévenir is to predict. Tenir is to hold. Now, they also use the verb tenir in an expression for just like standing up, which I'll explain later. Revenir means to come back. So venir is to come and revenir is to come back. Okay, so there are the meanings of those verbs. And when I say that they're conjugated similarly, what I mean is that, so if you take the verb venir and you say je viens. Okay, so look what we're doing here. We have IENS is how we're spelling that conjugation. Now we started off with a V because it was venir. If it was revenir, it would be je reviens. For prévenir, it would be je préviens. Obtenir would be OBTIENS. Okay? Do you see the similarity? So for each subject pronoun, the spelling, once you get to, you have to kind of see the ENIR as an ending on the infinitive. So everything before that is a bit of a stem, and then these longer things would be the endings. You don't really look at this verb that way, stems and endings, because it's irregular. It's just a matter of memorizing. But just for your information, these verbs do all conjugate the same way as venir. They have those changes in the stem, and they follow a bit of a pattern there. So for testing purposes, I'm just asking you to memorize the je and vous forms of venir itself, just the verb venir for like the grammar conjugation. But I do want you to know what these verbs mean, so that if you saw a sentence, if you saw them in, you know, a story or some type of context, you would know what you were looking at, you would know what it meant. Okay? Okay, you are going to use this page. You're going to use notes pages 6 and 7 to complete this page as part of your homework. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of these for examples. So let's look at sentence number 1. It says, nous something que Sophie va rentrer demain. So you need to consider which one of these verbs would make sense in the sentence. Start by making sure you understand what the sentence is suggesting. We something that Sophie is going to come home tomorrow, right? And so which one of these would make sense in that sentence? You know, prendre has a lot of different meanings. Take, have, mettre is to put on, to turn on. And then we have croire, which means to believe or to think. It doesn't have to be like a firmly held belief. It can just be like, oh, I think this, kind of like giving an opinion or something. So yes, 2 of you correctly identified which verb you would use for number 1. It would be croire. And so what I would ask you to do is circle croire, so we know, at least you know which verb to use. But then over here in the blank, you need the correct form of croire. So that's where your grammar notebook comes in. So it would be croyons, right? If you were doing this alone, you'd be looking through your grammar notebook. So again, I'm not really expecting you to memorize the conjugation of every verb that is introduced. What I'm hoping is that through repeated exposure and, you know, sentences that provide some context, that you'll just get to know those verbs, and so when you read them, you'll know what they're saying. So okay, vous something le salon. Now let me point out, it doesn't say dans le salon. So le salon has to be the direct object of whatever verb we're using here. Okay, so let's look at our options. Déjeuner, to eat lunch. Nettoyer, you should see on page 6, would tell you what that verb means. You'd find it in the YER verb section. Payer would also be in that section. Which one of these verbs makes the most sense for the context of the sentence? Yes, nettoyer is the only one where le salon could be the direct object of that. So then your notes tell you what to do with the YER verb. For vous, it's kind of, it's just like an ER verb, right? So it would be vous nettoyez le salon. All right, so some of these are easier than others. I'm going to point out for a testing situation, I would not be expecting you to get your accent marks just perfect. But on this worksheet where we are practicing how the accent marks go different directions based on which subject pronoun you're using, I would want you to get that right. And that is explained on page 6 of your notes. So we look at number 6, we have Jacques, something la glace à la vanille. And so it doesn't say he pays for the vanilla ice cream. It says the vanilla ice cream is going to be the direct object. So he's not going to believe the vanilla ice cream. He prefers the vanilla ice cream, right? So we're going to use this verb préférer, préférer. So you should see it there on one of those sections of the spell changing verbs. And if you look at the pattern that it explains, the infinitive has an accent aigu on this E here. But what does it say will happen when you're using a third person singular subject pronoun like Jacques? So nothing changes up until we get to that E. And then what? Now, the way that your notes are written, that's correct, Graham. The way that your notes are written, it doesn't exactly tell you what the ill singular conjugation is, but the je form represents je, tu, il, and il plural. And the vous or nous, whichever one I gave you on the notes, represents both nous and vous. Okay? It does turn to an accent grave, is what happens. But what I want you to understand about the notes that you have in your on page 7 is that when we're talking about the spelling change verbs where they have the different accent marks, the je, tu, il, elle, and il, elle singular forms, they all have silent endings. And so therefore, whatever spelling you're doing in the stem of those is going to be the same as each other. Like they're a group. And then the nous and vous forms are going to be more like the infinitive because they have pronounced endings like the infinitive has a pronounced ending. So for example, if this had been vous, it would be préféré, like this. Okay? All right. I think that's all the examples I'm going to do. This packet will be emailed to you tonight, and you will not need to print every page because we're going to do some of it during class time, and so you won't need to redo those things at home. But so you don't have this yet. So just look on your screen for now while we work together. So in the coming chapters, we're going to be learning about direct object pronouns. So I wanted to just kind of highlight direct objects before we get to talking about the pronouns. So these are some verbs that some of them should be very familiar to you. Some of them might be kind of newish, and I think that they would be on page 5 or 6 or 7 of your notes packet. What we're going to do is you guys are just going to help me match up a verb with a logical direct object for that verb. So it says je ferme, which means I close. What's a logical thing that you can close? Okay, so last week we were talking about question formation, and we were using a lot of yes-no questions. And now I want to talk about qu'est-ce que, which means what. And so this is more of an information question where when you ask the question, the response is not going to be yes or no, but it's rather going to be a direct object. So qu'est-ce que means what when it's the direct object. So for example, what is he doing? What is he eating? What are we ordering? That kind of thing. So here I have some questions using qu'est-ce que, like qu'est-ce qu'il cache? And when you answer a question like this, you would keep the subject and the verb il cache, and you need the direct object, okay? Because qu'est-ce que means what as a direct object. So it's an interrogative pronoun that serves as a direct object and means what. So on page 3 of this packet, activity E at the top explains some verbs that can have more than one meaning. So we have marcher, which we've talked about before as meaning to walk, but it also means to function or to work. So kind of like in English, if you might say, is your refrigerator running? In French, you would say, is your refrigerator walking, right? But that verb just really means, is it working? Does it function? So that's marcher with two meanings there. Passer, we have talked about before, meaning to spend an amount of time. So passer la journée, or passer un mois en France, or passer une semaine à la plage. We also learned that you would use it in the phrase like take a test, passer un examen. And then if you use it with the preposition par, then it means to pass. So here it's a cognate. You can say je passe par le parc, or je passe par l'école, that kind of thing. So you're going to use either the verb marcher or the verb passer in each of these sentences on page 3. They're just ER verbs, so they're easy to, use the correct grammatical form, but you just want to practice using, learning their meanings, their multiple meanings. Okay, also on page 3 is activity F, where you're just going to make up answers that are at least somewhat logical to questions such as these. So we're using question words now. Où, qu'est-ce que, pourquoi, qu'est-ce que, qui, quand, etc. So you want to make sure you know what your question words mean and just come up with complete sentences that make sense for activity F on page 3. And then moving on, there's a section about forming questions. This is activity A. It says you previously learned to use inversion to ask a question if the subject is je, tu, nous, or vous. The other subject pronouns begin with vowels, which makes it a little bit trickier. If the verb ends with a T, no problem. It's the same as what you learned before. You're just switching the subject and the verb. Est-il sympa? Est-elle gentille? Sont-ils français? No problem. But a lot of verbs, when they're conjugated in the third person, don't have a nice solid consonant sound like that at the end of them. So for example, elle a un chien. And we know how the French feel about vowels bumping together. This is not allowed. It's not beautiful enough. It's not smooth. So this is a kind of extreme thing that they do, but they actually insert the letter T to break up the vowels. Okay? So the inverted question form of elle a un chien would be a-t-elle un chien? Il a une nouvelle voiture. A-t-il une nouvelle voiture? Elle parle anglais. Parle-t-elle anglais? Elle travaille au supermarché. Travaille-t-elle au supermarché? So you can also combine question words with inversion. Combien d'enfants a-t-elle? Pourquoi lave-t-il la voiture? And keep in mind that only pronouns can be inverted. If you have to use a name in the question, you have to put it in addition to the pronoun. You can't flip the subject and verb if the subject is a person's name. You can only flip the subject and verb if the subject is a pronoun. So if you have to name the person, you're going to say the person's name, then flip subject and subject, pronoun, and verb, and continue with your sentence. So, Marie a-t-elle une voiture rouge? Alain parle-t-il italien? And keep in mind that inversion is the most formal way to ask a question. So all this great effort that you'd be going to write or say inverted questions would be pretty formal speech. Okay, so with this, I'm just wanting you to be able to recognize a question when it's done that way, okay? So if I hadn't explained all of that and you saw ta sœur a-t-elle une voiture, you might not understand what was going on here. It might be difficult for you to find the verb in this sentence, right? But now you know they're naming the person, even though it's not a name, but it's just saying more specifically who we're talking about. Then we've got the subject inverted with the verb and the T to break up the vowels. Ta sœur a-t-elle une voiture? And so now you know that this question is asking, does her sister or his sister have a car? Okay, so you'll just need to answer those questions. Okay, so you have a test coming up, and I want to talk to you about what you will find on that test. Okay, so for vocabulary, I want you to know your avoir and faire idioms. To go with that, you should know how to conjugate avoir and faire. You also need to know some professions. I would just focus on the ones that are not cognates, because there's a lot of cognates. Those are easy to recognize. But you want to spend more time with the ones that are a little harder. Also, in your notes packet, page 1, let me find the, okay, so on page 1 of the notes packet, you have just sections 1 and 2, which are conjunctions and prepositions, and then on page 2, the question words. I'm not saying every word on pages 1 and 2 of the notes, but I'm saying sections 1 and 2 of page 1 and the question word section of page 2. Okay, I believe the avoir and faire idioms are like pages 3 to 5 or 4 to 5 or something. You do have, you're also going to need to know the conjugations of être, vouloir, pouvoir, dire, and venir. Now for être, I want you to know all 6 forms, but for the rest of them, just the je and vous forms. Okay, and you need to know what all of these verbs mean as well. Okay.